What's up guys, Artem MMA Analysis here. I'm going to be talking about Road to UFC. If you guys don't know what Road to UFC, I've actually written up an article on the FLYWEIGHT Picks website. I will be pinning the link to that article in the comment section below, and I'll probably put it in the description as well, so you can get up to date about what Road to UFC is. In this article I talk about the origin of Road to UFC, what it is, and what UFC's intentions are with Road to UFC, as well as a little bit of who's in the roster. That's what you're watching this video for, man. I've got the list of who's in the roster, but there is a little bit of a disclaimer here. I will note that some weight classes might be slightly incorrect. For example, Top Noi is listed as a flyweight in my list, even though most of his fights are at 130 pounds. I did the best with the information I had to put 8 fighters in each weight class. Like at one point I had like 7 fighters in flyweight and 9 fighters in featherweight, and I was like, what's going on? Something's going wrong. Turns out Top Noi has been fighting at 130 pounds, not 135, so I'm going to assume he's going to be fighting at flyweight. So there's a little bit of assumption here, but I believe that these guys are in the Road to UFC. So now with that intro over, let's just get straight into the list. The first fighter on the flyweight division is Singh Park. The second fighter is Choi. Uchida, who is 5-1, Jeremiah Suraga, who is 6-2, Rama Supandi, who is 7-3, Top Noi, who is 7-3, Walandu Rosario, who is 10-3, and Lunky, who is 14-8. So now that we've quickly gone over who's fighting, let's look at Singh Park's record. He's 26 years old and he's from South Korea, and he does have a couple of decent wins in his record. All of his wins except for one have come inside the distance, and a few of them by submission, a few of them by strike. So he's got a good, well-rounded skill set, it seems, without me looking at any tape study on him. And his one best win, in my opinion, is the 6-3 win most recently in 2021 last year. Sung Choi, who is only 4-1, but he does have a little bit of amateur experience. He went 6-3 as an amateur, and since then he has gone a little bit of a 3-fight win streak, but not necessarily over the highest level of competition. It's also worth noting that he's fought Steve Erceg, and he did lose to Steve Erceg, who is fighting on Dana White's Contender Series later this year, which is pretty exciting. So there's a little bit of a comparison there. Uchida is a madman, dude. This guy made his amateur debut when he was 14 years old. I feel like that's absolutely insane. He fought this guy called Rama when he was 14 years 7 months old and weighed in 109 pounds. But now since then he's been fighting at 125. He's 19 years old. He doesn't necessarily have any super great wins on his record, in my opinion, and has lost to Atsushi Makigawa, who was 6-21. Probably isn't really the best look coming into a big tournament like this, but if he does get signed to the UFC, he will be the youngest fighter on the roster, and he is only 19 years old, only a few months older than me, so potentially a bright future ahead of Takeru Uchida here. Jeremiah Suraga, he is a flyweight fighter, and he is fighting out of Indonesia, and he's on a little bit of a 2-fight win streak over a couple of good guys, including Wadi Sawadi. Sorry, he lost to Wadi Sawadi, but he has the win over Adido Raminto Manurang, and he finished him in the 4th round, so he showed that he's actually got some 5 rounds cardio there, or at least cardio enough to finish a guy in the 4th round, which is always a pretty good look. And once again, most of his wins have come inside the distance. In fact, I believe all of his wins have come inside the distance. A lot of rear naked chokes on his win list as well, so definitely worth looking at Jeremiah Suraga into this tournament coming up. Rama Supandi's pretty exciting because he actually does hold a win over Wadi Sawadi. This is the guy I got confused with earlier. He's got the win over Wadi Sawadi, but Jeremiah Suraga has the loss to Wadi Sawadi, so we're already able to make some connections here between the two fighters. But after that, he did lose to a guy that was 7-2, but he has bounced back since then with a first round submission win, which is very exciting for him over David Leonardo. He's flyweight, he's 5'6", so he's going to be a little bit taller than a couple of these other guys, and he is a 7-3 record, so he does have a little bit of experience there. Top Noi is fighting out of Thailand. I believe he's actually the only Thailand fighter on the entire roster and on the weight classes, which is pretty crazy. Tapology, as I said, he does have him listed as a bantamweight, but most of these fights, if you look into them, have taken place at 130 pounds, and he has fought at 125 before, so I'm kind of just making the assumption that he's going to be fighting at 125 on this tournament here. So he might be at bantamweight, he might not, so you might have to swap him out with someone else on the bantamweight list. But he's got the win, the majority decision win over Isaac Pimentel, who was 17-9. That win got him onto this tournament here, but apart from that, he did go on a little bit of a win streak before running into Kai Asakura, who's a really good prospect, and Yusaku Nakamura, who's a lot more experienced than him, and yeah, he lost the decision to both of those guys, so he has shown that he's got some durability. He has been fighting upper weight class at 130 pounds, if that makes any sense. I think that he's going to be fighting at 125, but I can't guarantee anything here, but I do believe he is. So Wayland Del Rosario has a 10-3 record. But the thing about Wayland Del Rosario's record that does scare me off a little bit is the level of competition that this guy has faced. Even the level of competition that the guy has lost against recently. In 2019, he lost to a guy that was 4-8, and his last win comes over a guy that was 1-3. And he hasn't fought since 2019. He's taken about 2 years off. 2 years and a little bit off, and now he's going to be returning to Road to UFC. It's going to be very interesting to see if the 29-year-old is able to make those improvements before moving into a big tournament like Road to UFC, where he could potentially be on the UFC roster. And now moving on to an opponent who I actually think, although his record is 14-8, I feel like he potentially could be one of the favourites to win the whole tournament. We've got Lunky, who lost a decision to Erison Fahea last year in Dana White's Contender Series 2021. Since then, Erison Fahea has actually got a belt signed for Dana White's Contender Series 2022, so we potentially could be seeing Erison Fahea on the UFC roster. But apart from that, he does have wins over some relatively decent levels of competition, like a 13-6, a 4-1, and a 7-0 as well when he was 7-3. And he has been in there with a lot of good competition, like Abdullah Aliyev, who was 9-0 at the time, and Boki Zhang, who was 14-7 at the time as well. That one loss to Erison Fahea. Erison Fahea hasn't fought since, so it's hard to tell if that was a good or bad loss. But he did lose a decision in that one there, and he wasn't necessarily expected to win. I think he was a bit of an underdog there, but he is only 24 years old. I do trust that he's going to be making those improvements, and I think that he's fighting out of the UFC PI. I think he's actually the only fighter fighting out of the UFC PI in this flyweight 8-man tournament. So once again, let's just go over the list. We've got the 5-0 Singh Park, Seung Guk Choi, who is 4-1, Takeru Uchida, who is 5-1, Jeremiah Suraga, who is 6-2, Rama Supandi, who was 7-3, Top Noi, who was 7-3, Wayland Del Rosario, who was 10-3, and Lunky. I feel like the fighters to really look out for in this tournament do come towards the back end. I feel like Lunky's a guy to look out for in this one. Jeremiah Suraga is potentially a fighter to look out for in this one, and Rama Supandi as well. I would probably put in that list just because he has had a couple of decent wins on his record as well. I feel like there's definitely a few good prospects in here as well. It's going to be very exciting fights. The flyweight division, in my opinion, isn't the most stacked on the tournament list. I feel like the featherweight, when we get round to that, the featherweight list is the most stacked in my opinion. There's some great fighters on there. There's some great fighters on the flyweight list as well, but I just feel like it's not as stacked as some of the other weight classes that we have on my list.